You're paying hundreds a month for funding signals, and for that money, you're getting a list of companies that raised last week, maybe last month. I built a system yesterday that finds every Series A company that raised in the last 24 hours, enriches their domain and round details, pushes it straight to Clay, and it costs under $2 a month. And it only takes 20 minutes to build. The engine runs on the same self-annealing loop that Andre Karpathy described. Feed it ground truth, let it discover its own search patterns, and let it get smarter every single run. Today, I'm walking you through all of it, from finding the right funding sources, creating ground truth, annealing the search against real data, and deploying it to Trigger.dev to run every morning. And the best part, this applies to any go-to-market signal you want to build, so you'll be fully equipped to build your own custom signals directly from Claude Code. To run this system, you're just going to need two things. You're going to need my research process builder, which you can get at leadgrow.ai/Claude Code, and you're going to need SerperDev. SerperDev is the cheapest way to programmatically do Google searches across news, maps, whatever, and it'll give you 2,500 free queries that you can basically fuel an entire go-to-market signal with, and it comes down to 75 cents per 1,000 searches. So just imagine, every signal you want only costing 75 cents per 1,000. Now let's get into building. So the best way to get these systems in place is actually to do the initial process yourself. Now, we can see here that just by doing a quick search of Series A funding April 20th, 2026, which is today's date, we can go ahead and identify very quickly companies that have raised money. So we have Ethermed raising an 8.5 million Series A, Black FinTech Weekly, UK-based company led by 3T, Wamo raised as well. And so we're going to see some other notes that we're going to have to put in here, which is that we need to be careful of not a new fundraised company with the VC that is announcing it. We're going to want to pull from LinkedIn, times where we want to pull from other sources. We have a list of the Series A funded startups 2026 via Fundraise Insider. You can see that this seems to be updating and it seems to be a lead magnet. So we're probably going to want to ignore that. And really, if you want to do the lazy man's version of this system, you could simply rely on AI Overview. But AI Overview does a really good job of giving you sources. So I'm going to say list all the sources for these announcements you are claiming. And what I want to do is I want to take these announcements and these sources and actually paste them directly into Claude Code to give it ground truth. Once it has ground truth, its job is to anneal against that ground truth. So here we go, news aggregators, market summaries, and I'm just going to hand all of this over. All right, Claude, so I'm going to actually paste in some ground truth for April 20th, 2026. And it's ground truth on fundraising that happened today with sources, which should help you out. As you go through sources again, let's avoid like paid lead magnets and things like this that are listing things oftentimes in bulk, and instead opt for first party sources. And so that means we're probably going to want to go with LinkedIn posts from VCs and such. The final thing as you plan out this build, I want you to keep in mind is that we're going to run into issues with analyzing the data at times, because sometimes you're going to get the name of the VC in the announcement instead of the name of the company initially. So you need to be patient to know when you need to go after the company versus the name. And so we're going to want to use GPT agent using our OpenAI API key, equipped with SerperDev as a tool that it can call, right? In order to do web research, but also look at that web research for this system and distill down what is serviceable, right, and usable. And that can either be passed off to a scraping agent to scrape the ones that are scored highly, which is my preference because we don't want to inundate models with too much information. And in terms of outputs, what we want to get is company name, company domain, the source, the amount raised, and the reasoning for the round from this scraping process, okay? So let's anneal on that using a smart model like 4.6 Opus, and then we can move on to something like 4.0 Mini with tool use in order to execute on finding the information. If 4.0 Mini with tool use isn't effective enough, we can graduate to 4.1 Mini with tool use as needed. So we're gonna let that run. And in the meantime, I want you guys to brainstorm other ways you can do this sort of stuff. You can create your own signals in a variety of ways. You can use things like Trigify to do it, but for the most part, unlock your mind and understand Boolean search, which I have a video you can find Boolean search and parameters. But what this research process builder is using Boolean search and different search patterns in order to, existing patterns, ground truth structure, in order to identify what is possible, what is doable, what can be found, okay? And so one thing I'm concerned about here is that it may not have gotten all of the links. So I'm going to paste the links one by one, just in case. So I'm going to grab layout all links in plain text. That way it's going to have the links to use as ground truth. So yeah, this is fundamentally different. Find Series A daily sweep, not company-specific lookup. Yeah, discovery for sources within 24 hours. Trigger.dev deploy and deferred, build the process logic, containerize later. One thing you you paste ground truth for April, but I don't see it in that message. Okay, so I forgot to paste it. That's fine. Ground truth and ground truth links. So Zenscar, thesasnews.com, not just domains. I want the links with their properly laid out. So we'll get those links and then we'll see. So I actually went ahead and asked Claude to make sure that as it goes through this process, that it checks for previous days, checks multiple days. After annealing on the ground truth, once it was happy with things, I said, great. Now we need to test it against new data. So let's start utilizing different days in order to find the right company. It's doing an enrich and extract system. So it's using Spider to quickly scrape things. If you don't know Spider's just an unbelievably fast scraping API. You can do a lot of this stuff locally, but I like to use live systems that would be used if I was running it in the cloud. When it carries over to being an automated process, it has some resilience built in. And you can see it found 16 companies and managed to enrich them across the stages. Honestly, that's pretty good. Let's check out Creo and kind of see if Creo is anything worth reaching out to. Meet your AI super agent, run any task, anytime. Awesome. Love that. So we can see it's finding some pre-seeds, which is going to happen and totally fine. We can always pull out the non-Series A companies as needed. And the beauty of this is as we fully figure out the system, we can see 1 source, 2 sources, yada, yada, yada. 61 raw filtered to 37. Series A daily pipeline, TBS, so it ended up running it. Does not need an Anthropic API key. Perfect. What is this pipeline actually doing? It's using Serper in order to Google search. It's looking at those Google searches and deciding on more Google searches, basically like a Clayagent, but a heck of a lot cheaper because it mostly doesn't have to do much scraping. And of course, not housed within Clay, which is nice. Once we finalize the system, what can we do with it? Well, it gives us a blueprint. And so the beauty of systems like this is they build on each other. This was so fast and so easy to figure out because I already had a prompt for companies, right, inside the research process builder that is able to, 1, find a company's recent funding, right, given a company, and 2, it's able to find a company's website given a company's name and a little bit of additional context around its industry, what it does, or location. Okay, that means that as you build more stuff, right, we want just seed companies. We want all funded companies. We want, right, XYZ. We can continue to anneal the pipeline as needed and spawn new pipelines with ease. The final thing here and where it went wrong is if you use Claude, it always wants to use freaking Anthropic API keys. So I'm going to reiterate, we are going to use our OpenAI API key to facilitate the system in live action. Let's do one more test using that key in the handoff, and then we can proceed to Trigger.dev, handoff, EU coverage gap, that's fine. And SpiderDev should be the primary tool to use, not the fallback. Then we can be off to the races. Let me know if you require additional Trigger.dev documentation for this. And so if you aren't familiar with what Trigger.dev is, let me show you very quickly here. Trigger.dev is basic end-to-end, but more so purpose-built for deploying agents. And I think the biggest thing here is that with Trigger.dev, you can create your own automations in plain language. So whatever you want, you're basically scripting it and then deploying scripts into the cloud. It's not node-based, it's not integration-based. And importantly, we've just found that it's quite a lot cheaper than end-to-end to run some of these workflows at scale. And the way the plans scale is very, very generous when it comes to the way it handles, and they don't gatekeep features behind like an enterprise tier plan. You basically get everything you want out of the box. We're just going to host this pipeline directly on here. You can see it provides a ton of great examples. And in fact, they come with 6 skills out of the box that makes it really, really easy to get started and just build automations from scratch without having to dive into an interface yourself, which is really nice. Not affiliated, just a tool we use. Now, the last few steps were a little bit risky to show directly. Let me walk you through them very quickly. Basically, what happened is we finalized the search, right? We were happy with it. We converted into a TypeScript flow for Trigger.dev. And all we did for that is provide Trigger.dev documentation. I may make our Trigger.dev CLI open source very, very soon. So you don't have to grab an MCP and cloud your context with it. And then we had it map out the Supabase schema based on the real outputs we created. And that's why it's important to create the system locally and then transfer it over to production, because by having these real systems in place, we were able to ensure that the carryover to production, actually live examples being worked off of and real outputs being worked off of. We opened up our Supabase, went to our SQL query, and we just pasted in the schema query for it to create a table. And then I use the Supabase CLI so that the system can see that table and see that snippet. Claude Code can see that and embed that into the Trigger.dev TypeScript workflow that you see on my screen here. And inside Trigger.dev, all I had to do is set up the environment variables and create a new project. Took maybe 1 minute. And now we can see here that we've pulled and enriched 20 records, 19 of which were absurd to Supabase, 20 of which were sent to the webhook. We could improve this system over time. The reason that only 19 made it to Supabase is because Supabase already had one of them inside of that project. And so I might say add an enrichment to this system directly from our Supabase before deciding to send it to the webhook so we can get as much information through to the webhook as possible. But let me quickly show you what's showing up inside Clay, because I decided to route this to Clay. And then we have a standalone Supabase that we can go and reference over time whenever we need to grab Series A companies. Just one.